Hello, and welcome to our event on Whip Your Cloud Costs into Shape. Today's webinar is sponsored by Harness and produced by Actual Tech Media. My name is Scott Becker. I'm from Actual Tech, and I am delighted to be your moderator for this special event. Now, before we get to today's great content, we have 4 housekeeping items that will help you get the most out of this session. So first off, we want this to be an informative event for you, so we encourage any questions in the questions box in your webinar control panel. But not only will we have team members responding to questions during the live event, but we'll also have a dedicated Q&A session at the end of the presentation where we'll discuss in greater detail some of the top questions that you have. That Q&A panel is also the place to let us know about any technical issues that you might be experiencing. A browser refresh will fix most audio, video, or slide advancement issues, but if that doesn't work, just let us know in the Q&A and we'll provide further technical assistance. Now, second, in the handout section of your webinar control panel, you'll find that we're offering several resources. I'd especially like to call your attention to a link to get started with Harness. There are also some links labeled ATM, which stands for Actual Tech Media. I encourage you to access all of those resources now and share them with your friends and colleagues. Now, third, at the end of this webinar event, we'll be awarding a $250 Amazon gift card to one lucky registrant. Of course, you must be in attendance during the live event to qualify for the prize. Official terms and conditions of today's prize drawing can be found in the handout section as well. Just scroll to the bottom and you'll find the link there. Now, finally, one of the best benefits of this event is the opportunity to ask a question of our expert presenters. So to help encourage your questions, we have a special additional prize. That's another Amazon gift card, this one for $50 for the best question. After the event is over, we'll look at all the questions that came in, pick out the very best one, and contact that prize winner. Okay, with all that housekeeping out of the way, let's get to today's fantastic session. So it's my pleasure to introduce you to our presenters today. We have Eric Minnick, who's Director of DevOps Solutions at Harness, and we have Riley Snyder, who's a Solutions Architect at Harness. Eric and Riley, welcome. Thanks for being here.
Hey, it's so great to be here. I'm really excited for today.
Yeah, glad to be here. Glad to talk about Harness and a couple of the products we have to offer.
Super. All right. Well, let me get out of your way, and Eric, the floor is yours.
All right. Well, let's get after it. So let's do this. So let's talk about cloud cost. And today I think how we want to do that is talk about the relationship between developers and the cloud, right? And why they benefit so much from the cloud. And then at the same time, look at the risks that we have when we give developers free rein to go do whatever they want. And a lot of those risks are going to be around costs. And that's going to lead into a conversation about strategies for empowering our developers to use the cloud without putting us at financial risk or really other sorts of risks as well. We'll use Harness technology as a touch point to make some of the conceptual ideas more concrete. And we'll have a demo from Riley showing how that all fits together and how we do this. Cool. So with that, let's get into this idea of developers, cloud, how they relate. And one of the things that really struck me looking through the most recent State of DevOps report is they looked at what it means to give our application teams flexible infrastructure. And when you really look at what flexible infrastructure means, that you've got infrastructure that's scalable, it's elastic, that it's available through self-service and automation, like they're talking about cloud, right? And they're talking about cloud where developers have a degree of automated self-service. And then they looked at the impacts that this sort of technology has on several things related to the organization. And it was fantastic, right? These little up arrows are as strong an endorsement as they provide, right? This double up arrow means strongly positively enhances. So when developers have good self-service, for this flexible infrastructure, the overall organizational performance is enhanced. That means that the overall organization, company, etc., is more likely to be meeting profitability goals, growth goals, those sorts of major initiatives that you have that are business centric are positively influenced by developers with access to cloud. And this scales down, right? The individual teams are meeting their goals, and more focused on kind of DevOps-y things, software delivery within that team performance is also greatly enhanced. The rate that we are able to get changes out the door improves. The likelihood that we break things when we change decreases. Our ability to respond and fix things when they do break, that gets better too. Everything seems to get better. And there's even a slight improvement to overall operational improvements, performance. Things like cost actually get better in these sorts of environments when it's done well. And so that's all extremely promising, right? And this does make some intuitive sense that developers are well placed to control the infrastructure that their applications run on. When we look at best practices out of things like manufacturing, right, we learn that the workers on the assembly line are well positioned to suggest changes to the assembly line and to identify problems with assembly. Developers are closer to their applications running in environments than just about anybody else, right? They're the right people to think about how should infrastructure be adapted to the needs of the application they're working on. And when we give them self-service, right, they've got better agility, right? And they're able to respond both to changing needs of the app, and when something goes wrong, they're in a good position to make a change to fix it. And this leads to satisfaction in the job, right? I think we feel better when we have more control. And Riley, I know you've experienced this, right? Like having better control is a positive thing, right?
Yeah, exactly. I want to spend my time doing the things that I'm, more capable of doing, right? Finding solutions to technical problems, right? Investigating, my infrastructure, things that come up, being so close to make those changes. I don't want to have to open, tickets to be able to provision things and wait for that to complete, right? That's kind of time wasted, productivity lost, right? And so if I have more control over my application, what I'm doing, how I'm deploying it, right, then I'm able to be more efficient and to just spend more time doing the things I want to do, right? Which for me is the technical work, right? It's not putting in requests and having to think about that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I like how you mentioned tickets. I've heard a lot of developers I work with refer to like opening tickets and waiting for them as like soul destroying, right? It's just like
I can only get up to go get coffee, so many times a day, right? While I'm waiting for things to be done. And if I'm submitting tickets and we have, hundreds of engineering teams, imagine how many tickets are going in a day, right? I'm just someone in the queue. And, my last job, we'd have to bring the network team donuts, right? If we wanted our firewall request done that day, right? With AWS, it's an API call, right? To get that done. So yeah, it definitely makes things a lot better.
Yeah, one of those is a little more efficient. All right. So we want to do this, right? We want to give our developers the keys, but there's some risk, right? There's a reason why many organizations don't do this. They're not crazy, right? And when we look at this, right, a lot of this gets into this whole security and compliance angle, right? If you're just thinking, oh, you know what my application needs? It needs some storage. Let's attach an S3 bucket. Right? You also need to be thinking, I need to make sure that doesn't have a public IP address, because that's got just a recipe for getting data stolen. I've seen that hundreds of times out there in the industry. So there's this tension between like, how do we make sure that all this happens and it happens in a secure way, in a compliant way? And if we're trying to drive standards across the organization, it's really tempting to establish some central team that really believes in the standards and will do it the right way, right? Rather than letting this be diffuse and spreading out through the org. that gets really challenging to drive best practices through. And then, of course, cost risk, right? The reason we're here today, right? As a developer, I'm thinking, what does my application need first and foremost? Am I thinking about cost? Right? Maybe sometimes, but often it's out of sight, out of mind, partially because I've got slow feedback, right? When do we worry about cost? Well, about once a month when the bill comes in and there's a meeting that's called that my manager gets dragged into where we all get yelled at about spending too much money, right? And then for the couple of days after, while we take corrective action on that bill, we all care about cost and then we forget about it again, right? It's hard to keep this top of mind. There's a lot of things developers are tasked to do, and driving innovation is always going to be towards the top of that list, both from the business need and from what's satisfying and fun. Right? Cost is not going to be on the top of the list. And so we do end up in situations where you get sprawl, right? Things get spun up and forgotten about. Riley, I think we were just talking about this, in the last hour, right? Like people forget to shut things off. It's really easy to botch that.
Yep. Yeah. We're moving fast and doing the things that we like to do. Right. And that's not, checking the bill after everything I deploy. It's not looking back at what I did yesterday. If I'm iterating quickly, it's really easy, especially if you're just using the console or just running scripts, right, to deploy something and forget about it. And yeah, we see that all the time. I see it, in my own team's cloud accounts, even though, we use these tools, we have accounts where we don't turn them on, and it's crazy how things can spiral. So it's the freedom is great for the innovation, like you said, which is the top of the list, but some other things can suffer.
Yeah. And that's before we even think about like contracts that might steer us to use this or that, or to fine tune things. Like developers don't even know the terms of those things most of the time. Like there's no way they're going to have success with that. So there's a lot of ways of messing this up. And, I think that leads us into this conversation of, well, okay, how do we give developers the keys and not screw everything up, not break things, not waste a lot of money? And, as we were talking about this, we really thought that there were three big themes, three steps, right, that come together to get this right. First, we want to make sure that when we do provisioning, when we intentionally change our infrastructure, spin up a new environment, whatever that is, it is easier to do that right than do it wrong, right? That there's some guardrails in place that steer us in the right direction. Easiest way to get things done is to use our standards and best practices. Second, find ways of doing optimizations and tweaks in an automated way where it's predictable and obvious. And then finally, we know that the world is going to change, right? We're going to be correct in provisioning a large set of infrastructure, and then the use of that will decline with time. We need to detect that and say, hey, it's time to ratchet this thing down, move from large servers to small servers, respond to that change, whether that's a change in our contracting, a change to the use of our environments, or change somewhere else. Cool. Let's drill into these in a little more depth. And as we go, we'll talk both in terms of strategy and a little bit in terms of how Harness does this, so that it can be concrete. Right. So the approach that we recommend is to empower your developers with an infrastructure as code management solution. Right. So we've got a module within the Harness platform that does this. And this should really be focused on that first step. How do we automate the provisioning and make it easy to do it right, right? And provide some guidance to the developers around cost. And then for steps 2 and 3, leverage more of a FinOps-centric approach, right? Cloud cost management solutions to say, all right, how do we govern these environments that we have, keep an eye on what's changing out from under us and respond appropriately? Cool. So let's start with the provisioning side of things. Right? Um, as Riley was saying earlier, right, when we just let people go into the console, when we just kind of free form it, it's really easy to do things wrong. What we want to do is leverage infrastructure as code, right? So technologies like Terraform are really good for this. Now we've got kind of version controlled templates for our infrastructure. They're easy to review. We can see how they're changing over time. We get all of those sorts of benefits. And frankly, a central team that wants to drive standards can create these and distribute them out to the application teams, making it so it's like, hey, you don't want to write this yourself. We already did it for you and it's done right. Simplify doing it easier. Then we want to apply these changes through the provisioning process in an automated fashion, right? Something like the pipeline that we have down below, where we are running our plan. We are seeing what will change if we apply this infrastructure as code, and then applying policies and approvals to that before we actually execute it. Right? This allows us to make sure we're doing things right. You can make it better, and I think Riley's got this in the demo, by layering in things like security scans and policy checks and things like that up front, right? There's tools like TFSec, which will review a Terraform document and tell you if there are any obvious security problems with it. You should run those, and you should run those on an automated fashion so that it's difficult not to run those, right? No one should have to remember to run it. It should just be part of the process of making the thing happen. Sweet. So that's kind of the upfront provisioning side. Then we need to look at automatic optimization. And I think auto stopping is a really classic example of this. So when we're not talking about a production environment, right? We're worried about our developers. They're going to want lots of test environments. They're going to spin up a big test environment to do performance testing, right? But those things aren't being used all the time. So detect when they're not being used and turn them off, right? I mean, the most basic strategies we see around this are things like on a schedule, turn it off on the weekend or overnight, right? Getting more sophisticated, an approach that we take is we put a proxy in there and watch traffic into that environment. If no one's using it, turn it off. Someone tries to access it, turn it back on, right? Pretty simple, but massive improvements in cost, because you're only turning these things on when someone wants to use them. Right? And then you can take that sort of approach and you can apply that to your contractual commitments, right? Your RIs and such. What do you have? Build those things out in an automated fashion rather than on big spreadsheets. These sorts of strategies, and Riley will get into this more in the demo, allow you to really fine tune how you're interacting with the cloud in an optimized way without spending a lot of time on it, right? And that's really key, because if you have to do it by hand, you're going to mess it up and it's going to be expensive. We're trying not to be expensive. That's the whole idea. And then I think there's this trying to stay on track, right? The idea that you get the bill at the end of the month and then you analyze it is terrible, right? Given how quickly you can spend too much money in the cloud, the number of meme joke things that are like, oh, why are you homeless? Well, I spun up an AWS server and left it running overnight, right? Like, you can't let that go for a month before you detect that you're off track. So you need cost reporting. It needs to be live, right? And then you need alerts for when things start going weird, right? Or going out of budget. And that needs to be on the second or third day of the month, or at 2:00 in the afternoon, after it's been going on for, hours, not days or weeks or months, right? We've got to get this much quicker. So having that clear cost reporting tied in with appropriate alerting that knows about budgets, really critical for acting well, right? Like, as a development team, if I start spinning up a bunch of environments, and even if each one is relatively reasonable, but now my team is going to go over our budget significantly. Like, finding that out early allows us to, either turn stuff off or have a grown-up conversation about why the budget is wrong and our needs are different than what's been budgeted, right? Again, this is a good conversation to have on the third day of the month, not the 30th. Cool. All right. So these are those 3 big pillars that we want to hit. Do your provisioning in a way that helps your developers do it right, that gives them awareness of how they're going to spend the money so that they can do things in a good way up front. Help them out with techniques that optimize their spend automatically. So that's not something they have to worry about, but it is a benefit that the organization gets. And finally, have clear reporting and anomaly detection so that when things start going wrong, you correct it right away. And this allows you to set off in the right direction. And if things start going the wrong direction, you get back in the right direction really, really quickly. It gives you those safety nets that you need for your developers to be really effective. So those are the big ideas that we're going to want to drill into here. Cool. This works for real people, right? We've worked with hundreds of organizations around this, right? I think this quote from Jay is great, right? They were talking about, thinking that they had their FinOps game pretty solid, but expenses were still growing too much. And they were able to save a third of their cloud costs working with us. They got to a point where they felt really confident, really excellent, and their ability to understand how they were spending money and what they were spending it on allowed them to make better business decisions, right? You could see these apps are actually not profitable for us, right? We should probably exit those businesses. These other things are really profitable for us, right? If you've got the right visibility. Cool. All right, with that, I'd like to hand it over to Riley. And can you show us how this gets a little concrete?
Yeah, we'd love to. Well, let's get right into it. Let me share my screen here. So what I'm going to go into, Eric, you want to let me know? Just make sure you can see what I've got going on here.
Looks good. You might
Awesome.
bump up the font 1.
Oh,
I can read it. Uh-oh.
Oh, how do I do that in this new browser? So
I think you were fine. I think you can just run with it.
All right. So what I'm showing here, right, is our infrastructure as code module. And so when Eric was talking about, this new world where developers have all this power, right, to go out to these cloud platforms, and instead of having these, internal systems, right, for requesting a VM or requesting a database, right, they have all of Amazon or Azure or GCP, right, to provision anything they want, right. And so IACM, right, our infrastructure as code module, really gives them a place to kind of monitor that, right, and to structure it. So people aren't going into the console and just clicking buttons, right? They're not just doing scripts that, when the next person comes behind them is going to know what's going on. So the first thing we're seeing here, right, is a list of all of my applications, right, that have been deployed. Really, they're specific infrastructure projects, right? We're talking Terraform projects here. The first thing we're going to see off the bat, right, not just the list of infrastructure, is like a status, right? And so we can see, have things been deployed, right? We see a couple inactive, right, projects. They've been started but haven't actually launched yet. We see failed projects, right? So there's something going on with this RDS application here that maybe someone should take a look at because it hasn't been deploying successfully. And then we obviously see a bunch of active projects, right? We see infrastructure that's out there and deployed, right? And so if I click on one of these projects, this is probably my favorite feature of this after, being a longtime Terraform user and using GitHub Actions and just running things in the command line, right? I have this like inventory of what I've actually deployed, right? So whether I've actually defined resources in my code or I'm using some module I found on the internet, right? I can actually go and I can see visually what comprises my application in the cloud, right? And I click on any of these and I see all the details, right, that I need to know about, right? The sizing, the tags, anything about the instance, right? So a new developer coming into the team, an architect trying to just get his hands around some new application that he owns, or even someone just, kind of forgetting it's been a while since we've originally deployed this, and I forget what we're all using, right? This gives us, right, that resource, that cloud inventory right next to our code, right? And so this will list everything from every cloud, any kind of infrastructure you're deploying, right? So obviously, there's a bunch in here, like, we can manage the state for you. We have your configuration. But the next thing I want to kind of go into, right, is this history of my infrastructure, right? How has it been deploying, right? And we can even go into that, and we'll see kind of what our infrastructure as code module looks like here is how is infrastructure being deployed, right? Ideally, I'm sure a lot of developers out there, right, they get their pipeline, they write their infrastructure as code module, they put their Terraform commands in a line, right, and they launch it and they go. And when we talked about preventing misconfiguration up front, right, having teams that care about having those policies, right, you can actually make this your standard, right, deployment of, it's not, oh, teams are using Terraform in AWS, right? They're using Terraform to build their AWS infrastructure. They're deploying with their CI pipeline. We could say, no, this is the way, right, that we deploy infrastructure. It's through this standard pipeline template that we have, right? That if you're able to see the steps, and maybe I can zoom in a little, right? We have those security checks. We have the linting. We have the security tools. We have the things that actually look at our cloud infrastructure that we're deploying. And when you have that centralized team that cares about security and is writing policies, not just posting a Confluence doc or a Word doc that says, hey, these are the things that we want people to do, you can enforce that. And I can see here I've passed those checks, right? And so what does it look like maybe when I don't pass a check, right? So if I go to my pipeline list here, I'll look at an execution I triggered just before the demo. You can see my pipeline stopped right at the plan. And if I go over to policy evaluations, I'm being told right away, as soon as my pipeline has failed, why it's failed, right? And kind of an inference of what I can do to fix it, right? So we can see, right? Pipeline execution couldn't proceed due to a policy failure, right? So someone somewhere has written a policy, someone that cares about what's happening in the cloud. And you can see the error is I've used an instance type that isn't allowed, right? I used an extra large instance type, right? So again, kind of a hint at where we're going, right? Which is controlling your cloud costs. AWS has got a lot of instance types. They got a lot of CPU and memory and GPUs you can utilize, right? But if your organization, right, isn't ready for some of those large instances, or you want to do it on an approval basis, right? You don't want to restrict. You don't want to make your engineers, again, go and open tickets, right? But if you can write a policy that says, hey, they can provision what they want, as long as it follows our guidelines, right? They get that freedom, but people can feel more secure doing it, right? And so I see that I failed this, right? I used an instance that wasn't allowed. Well, I'll need to go back to my code, right? Or I can actually do it in the UI, right? If it's an input, I just need to change my instance type, right? It's not allowed. And I could even go in here, right? And you can see the policy that was evaluated. OPA is a great tool all across our platform, right? And so this is probably maintained by some security engineer, some platform engineer, right? That they've decided these are the instances we're allowing, and in this case, there's some required tags, right? If we go back, right, what does a successful run look, right? I'm a developer. I've written my infrastructure, right? I've committed code. I've manually triggered a build, what have you, right? There's some standard pipeline, right? That again is checking my code, making sure it's done in the right way. How do I confirm that, right? So I've got this master view of what's about to happen, right? We're talking about costs, right? We're getting to our cloud cost management module. Again, another hint of, hey, let's surface this up to the engineers, right? When you go to AWS, you provision an EC2 instance, Amazon doesn't tell you, hey, you're about to spend $20 a month, right? You got to wait till the end of the month and go check the bill, right? Or you got to go to Cost Explorer and look at what did I spend yesterday or 7 days ago, whenever that's updated. But here we're showing you, we're giving you an estimation, really, almost guarantee it's going to be lower than what it really is of what you're about to incur, right? So here's some brand new infrastructure, a first app deployed. I'm seeing, hey, I know this is going to cost me like $30 a month, right? So bringing, right, cost to the developer's mind, right? It's not an afterthought of finance, looked at the bill at the end of the month and I got a nasty gram, or my boss says, hey, we went way over budget last month, you got to change things. I'm knowing right now, what that costs. And I can actually see that breakdown, right? I can see I'm spending it on EC2 instances in this case. I'm spending a little bit on a load balancer, right? I can dive into where is this cost coming from, right? And you see everything is red up 100%, right? So if I had this application and it was $30 and maybe I changed to a bigger instance, right? I'd see, oh, it's going up 50%. Maybe I lower it. So it turns green. It says you're going down, you're saving money now this month, right? Because you're modifying your infrastructure to be more cost efficient. Really bringing this, front and center to the developer. And then we see our policies down here, right? So the policy that we failed earlier, we got to get some visual feedback here of, hey, you had that EC2 types policy and you passed it, right? You were using an instance type that's allowed, right? We see a lot of our customers have a lot of these policies, right? Because as soon as those security engineers, those platform engineers find out that, hey, you can write rules that instead of being retroactive, right, by auditing what's in the cloud, right, we can just stop it from even getting there. They go crazy with these, right? Which if I'm an engineer, that just makes me feel better about the things that I'm doing. Is I know I'm not going to, run into something later on. I know when I deploy my code, hey, this was done correctly. This was done in spec within the guidelines, right, that someone has set before me. And then finally down here, again, we kind of see, similar to an existing application that showed us what was running out there, right? We see, hey, what's going to be changed, right? Did I accidentally push some code that's going to delete everything and recreate it? Are there resources in here I didn't realize I was going to update, right? Does this look the same as what I thought my code was generating, right? So bringing all that front and center, right? Which, again, a lot of our customers come from the Terraform pipelines are just the commands written in a sort of a CI tool, right? Where they might have to go look at the logs and really, read in deep in these all black and white lines, right? Where here it's really front and center and I can actually dive into what's happening, right, with my infrastructure. So it's making it almost too easy, right, for developers to know exactly what's going on. And especially if you're new to the cloud, right? This really helps you understand what you're doing, right? It's not, again, just provisioning a virtual machine in our data center in the basement, right? This is an Amazon. There's a lot going on, and this really helps you get your hands around it.
Yeah, Riley, I think that kind of ease of consuming this sort of information, is this going to do what I expect? Is it going to cost a reasonable amount? Meaning that consumable is really, really important. And that even gets to things like, where does a given development team want this kind of information? Right? Some are going to be perfectly happy to come into a page like this in a web-based tool and review it, right? It's beautiful. Great. Others are like, well, the only way anything should change is through Git, right? And so we have customers who will take this kind of information and they'll automatically push it back into what's known as a pull request in Git and view it there so that a developer can approve it within their source control system. But still, you want the same information, you need it clearly displayed, and you need it where the developers will actually consume it, whether that's in source control or a browser or whatever. Make it easy, right?
Yeah, exactly. As innovation and velocity goes up, right? It's these developers they're working harder, right? They're more into the things that they're doing, right? Because they're not spending time doing those tickets. So yeah, bringing it all the way to them, the information all the way to them, right, is super important. So yeah, exactly. And so, we showed here how I can kind of, view all my applications, right? Or my infrastructures that are deployed, right? Their status, right? We can look at the changes when they've changed, right? But what's the kind of day two, right? Of I've deployed my application. I might not be changing the infrastructure all that much, right? What I'm doing every day probably is writing code, maybe pushing new container images that get auto pulled through my environments. Maybe I'm updating Lambda functions or front end code, right? Maybe I'm not touching my infrastructure all that much. And again, those cost estimates that we saw were just that, an estimate of, hey, here's, list price. Here are the things that we can measure before everything's deployed, but how do we track that cost, after the fact? How do we prevent like we said, you getting to the end of the month and going, oh, I accidentally did this and I didn't know it was actually going to, spiral into some other cost, right? And that's where our cloud cost module comes in. So, we have this overview, right, of, the cloud costs, right, at my organization, which we're going to get into different personas here, right, of I'm the engineer, right, and I care about my application, but so does every other engineer, right? And my FinOps people probably care about what my whole enterprise is spending, right? It's probably a lot more than $10,000 here that I'm spending in my account, right? And so, we see this overview breakdown here, but myself as an engineer, how do I get this to something I care about, right? Because I can't control what the enterprise is spending, right? But I can control my application is spending to a certain extent, right? With trying to be more efficient. And so with that, right, for the visibility, we have these perspectives, right? Perspective, a view, right? I can see I have a folder, right, for my application, this IACM CCM demo, right? And I see I have this view of my application, right? I see the last 7 days, what have I been spending, right? So we see the day that I deployed it, right? 60 cents. I deployed it late in the day, wasn't much going on, but I can see, hey, my costs have been pretty level, right? It's costing me about, almost $12 a day, which is maybe what I expected, maybe not, right? I see where it's being spent, right? It's all EC2 dollars, right? I can pivot around. I can say, I want to see what region I'm spending money in, right? Maybe I have, DR regions. Maybe I have some global application that's deployed in a bunch of different availability zones, right? There's all different ways that I can pivot this data, but it's useful to me because I know looking at this, that this is my application, right? This is something that I can wrap my hands around. And this can span, right? One account, multiple accounts, all accounts, right? We can look at specific account costs. We can look at cost by tags, right? So if I'm a developer and I, have 6 applications that I work on and those cross so many cloud accounts, right? Before I was in AWS and I would go to Cost Explorer and I'd look at one account, right? Where am I spending money, right? Here I can see everything that I have, right? I can really get my hands around it. And we look at the top, right? We see this budget, right? So I got a nice green bar, which tells me, hey, I'm doing pretty good, right? So I've got a $375 a month budget for this application, right? And we have a lot of customers who come to us and they don't budget, and we have tools that'll help you estimate that and at least give you a start, right? But if I go into this budget, I can click view, right? I'm gonna see some context, right, to this budget. I'm gonna see, first of all, what did I spend last month, right? I've got this bar of the month of January, right? I only spent $47, pretty good. I've got this line that kind of visually shows me, hey, I'm giving me good feedback of I'm under budget, right? But then what I love is on the right, I see the current month, right? So it's literally February 1st. We're 1 day in, and you can see that I've got kind of might not be easy for you guys to see. I got kind of a very small dark bar, and then the rest is like a light bar. And that's maybe more obvious if I look up top, but it's telling me, hey, you've spent, this much thus far, right? And I get a forecast, right? So 15%, right? And I've got 28 days left. I'm probably going to spend $54, right, at the end of this month, judging on what I've done so far, right? And so what this is doing is, again, not having me wait till the end of the month to figure out, oh, you're gonna blow through your budget, right? Or even just looking and saying, oh, well, I spent $50 today. If I multiply that by how many days are left in the month, I'm gonna go over my budget, right? We're giving you that immediate feedback, right? And alerting, right? We talked about how important that is. We can set up these alerts to say, hey, when developers are forecasted to reach some budget, right? Let's let them know. If they do reach, 50%, 75%, let them know. I don't care if it's the first day or the last day, right? And so it's helping bring this information, right, to the developers. It might not be in a PR, right, yet, that's the important term, but you're bringing it to them, right, and making it digestible, right? It's all here, right, very clear. And again, it's my application. That's the biggest thing that I hear from my customers, right, is they're used to just getting Excel reports of all the accounts, or again, they can go and see a account in Cost Explorer, but they can't see everything at once. And Harness is enabling that. Whatever your application scope is, right, we can map that out and we can give it to the developer to have them track, what's important to them. And so tracking your costs, right, is super important, but how do we make sure that we're efficient, right? And so Harness has several tools, right, within this module that help you achieve that. So the first thing, right, we have recommendations. So these are, this is Harness, looking at cloud, whether it's EC2, whether it's ECS, right? And we can actually surface up, hey, here are places where you're inefficient. Let's go ahead and get you the information you need to make a judgment call, right? Of, hey, we can make changes, right? And have a positive impact. So again, my account, only 10 grand a month. You say I have $1,200 of savings, right? It gives me a potential monthly spend if I just do nothing, right? But what I can do is I can go into these instances, right? And Harness is going to give me the data of, where I'm at now, where I could be, right? Why? What's the reasoning behind this? You see this instance is using a very small amount of CPU and just making it a little bit smaller, right? We're still going to use not a lot of the CPU, but we're going to the smallest instances available. We're going to save $100 a month, right? And if I know my application has a budget of $350, right? I know, man, $100, that's a third, right, of my budget that I'm going to save. Maybe that gives me room to increase, my database size. Maybe we're having performance issues, but we're already at our budget, right? Be more efficient, so that maybe we just take this $100 and we can even spend it somewhere where it actually improves our application, right? And we have tools, right, to throw these into Jira, throw these in the ServiceNow. Again, get them to the places where developers see them, right? I don't want to open tickets, but maybe how I work is off of, right, a board of tickets of feature enhancements, bug fixes, things that product is put on the backlog, right? Well, let's surface that up. Let's make a ticket in the backlog for, hey, check out this instance, right? It's been pointed out to us, right, that it's a little bit inefficient. And let's have a conversation, right? Let's keep that context of, are we going to apply this recommendation? Are we not? What's the reasoning, right? Helps, again, surface it up to the developer where they're doing their work, where they would expect to see their work, and not have to have them come into Harness, right, every day and refresh and look, do I have any recommendations that are within my application, right? We want to bring it to them, right? We're bringing code information to PRs. Let's bring cost and things we need to look at just into our task list. One of our more technical, right, savings tools is auto stoppings. This is one that most of our cost customers use, right? And so this is the ability for us to hook into your lower environments, right, and turn them off, right, based on usage, right? So you have some EC2 app, you have a database, right, that receives connections, right, from somewhere in these lower environments. You're probably not testing all the time, right? You have nights and weekends, right, where business might be happening during those hours, right? So your production instances, you want up all the time. But your development instances, you don't need them up all the time, right? And AWS, is charging you by the hour, right? For sure, for these resources. We can hook into that usage, right? Measure it and turn off, right, the applications if they're not in use. If we look down at this rule right here, this is that same instance of that application that we saw earlier that was, $12 a day, right, that was running constantly. This is actually that same application, right, deployed again, but with auto stopping, right? And it's a test application. It's my test application that I deployed to AWS. I've used it a couple times, as we can see in the logs. It's had some activity. We can see that by the purple in the graphs, right? But for the most part, it's been offline. I'm meeting with customers. I'm working on other examples, right? I'm only working, 8 hours a day, right? And so we can see I've saved $55. I've spent or I've actually spent $3, where the potential cost would have been $58. So had I just left this application up and running, I would have spent $60 to use it for, a couple hours, right? And so this really helps you identify, because we can run this in a dry run, of course, right? But it really helps you take action on those idle resources that are in your cloud, right? And like I said before, I see stuff all the time, right, with EC2 instances running in the cloud, and someone says they need them, right? But can we actually tell if they're logging in and using those? I don't want to have to go manually check, right? Harness can really just, get in the middle there and measure that activity and take it down for you. And of course, spin it right back up as soon as there's activity. One of the next tools we have, asset governance, is really when we talked about OPA and writing those governance rules for our infrastructure pre-deploy, right? Saying instance types, tags, maybe security groups, right? What they can and can't have, right? Stopping the developer before they deploy. Asset governance is a tool that can be used, right, both by FinOps teams and by platform teams to help correct things that happen after the fact. So we can say, hey, if you see a security group with this rule, let's correct it, right? But on the cost savings front, you can see you can write rules for detecting unused instances, right? So like here, RDS detect unused, right? So I can see I've got a couple instances here that weren't being utilized. Again, just like writing the rules for the Terraform your infrastructure, you can write rules for this, right? What is the metric that we want to measure, right? Again, this is maybe a more platform-centric tool, right? Your platform engineers maybe versus your FinOps are writing these, but it still is giving them the tools, right, to audit your environment and make sure things are being used like they should, right? And so asset governance can do a bunch of stuff. Our rule engine is pretty capable. And we see customers using it for all sorts of things, right? Whether it is cost savings, we see that a lot. Let's automatically resize an instance, all the way to, hey, we just want to go ahead and correct things, right? Things are misconfigured. We want to, not allow public buckets. We want to dedupe S3 buckets, all sorts of things. And then really the last big tool that we have for savings is our commitment orchestrator. So switching to a different count for that. So if you've been involved in cloud FinOps at all, right, you're probably aware of reserved instances and savings plans, right? So Amazon specifically, I'll talk about in this context, right, is gonna give you a deal, right, if you can commit to some level of usage. Pretty much every customer we have, right, has a FinOps group that is responsible for doing that, right? Looking at usage, seeing what can we estimate that we will use, what can we really rely on, having conversations with technical stakeholders, business stakeholders, getting future usage, right, and trying to make a best guess on what we can commit to, right? Our commitment orchestrator kind of takes all that out of the picture and really does it for you, right? We're already measuring your cloud costs, right? We can see the instances that you're deploying, how they're configured, right? And we can automatically make purchases, right, to help you be more efficient. And so we take a look at this here, and it's showing us, I have some savings plans and some reserved instances purchased, right? And we can see that I'm using, pretty much 100% of what I've purchased, right? But we can also see that I have a ton of on-demand cost, right? And so I'm actually only, even though I'm using 100% of what I'm paying for, I'm actually only 41% efficient, right? So 41% of the compute that my users are provisioning, I actually have a savings plan for, right? So Harness can, again, take all the information we already have based on showing you your purchases, right? And say, let's make this more efficient, right? Let's slowly increase, let's make a few more purchases. We use convertible instances. So as your developers are, again, right-sizing things, scaling things up for more performance, right? We're always taking in that information to make sure that we're making the right purchases, right, to make you more efficient. And so this picture right here is actually what it might look like if you came in, right, had been making purchases, right, and you're starting off your automated right journey of, yeah, you've done a great job. You've been making these purchases and they are saving you money, right? But as we can see, we can already tell you're not all the way there, right? There's a lot of headroom you could make, right, to become more efficient, right? And so all this across FinOps, across the specific engineers themselves, them looking at their application costs, really are all about giving you visibility into your costs today, not at the end of the month, right? And then giving you the tools to be proactive and to right size things, giving you the recommendations and the information you need to take action, right, to lower that bill, or again, to right size the bill, right? You're going to spend money in the cloud, right? But you should do it on the things that really get you the value that you're looking for, right? Not just extra CPU cycles that an application developer provision that they aren't going to use.
All right. Well, should we move towards Q&A?
Yeah, I think if there's some good questions, we should dive into those.
Yep, sounds good. All right, yeah, so questions here. We've got a few that have come in from the audience. One is From Ned, who's wondering how effectively does the Harness Cloud Solution platform effectively reduce cloud container costs? And he's got a related question that he read that Harness helped save somebody a lot on Kubernetes. Eric, I guess I'll turn that question to you first.
Oh, I think Riley's the pro on this
Okay.
one.
Yeah, let's take a minute or two on this. So, Harness has is a huge Kubernetes shop, right? We have our CD tools, and with that, when I showed recommendations, I focused on EC2. We have a great engine, right, for recommending Kubernetes right sizing, right? So if I go over and I select, let's do node pool and workload recommendations, right? Harness will actually be measuring, right? What's your Kubernetes setup like? What are you using, right? And what are you leaving on the table, right? So we can see here, Harness is actually recommending me a more efficient node pool setup based off of the compute that I'm using. So from a pure, just reducing my costs, right, in the cloud, right? Harness is recommending to me, you have way over provisioned clusters. And I'll say, I haven't seen a customer come onboard their Kubernetes clusters and not have, a recommendation at least for every cluster, right? You probably have multiple node pools. They're always over provisioned, right? Harness can help you get a little bit closer to being more efficient, right? And that's really only one piece of the puzzle, right? The second piece is the workloads, right? So people are deploying their applications, they're attaching some requests and limits, right? But what are they actually using? Harness can also go down to this workload level, right? Which is where node pools, maybe you're giving that feedback to your cluster administrators, your cloud engineers, right? How about your engineers, your application teams? Here's one saying, you've requested, right, in your cluster, a CPU and 2 gigs of memory. You're only using, fractional CPU and slightly less memory. You'd be surprised in the memory requests that I see customers have, right? Let's reduce that down, right? Because that's usually driving your node pool sizing, right? And so we're really correcting Kubernetes costs at two levels: the application costs to make their requests and limits more, efficient, more realistic, right, to what they're actually using. And then we can bring the node costs down, right, by resizing those node pools. And I could talk about Kubernetes recommendations for a while. The auto stopping I talked about earlier, we can shut down your pods when they're not being used. We have a great platform for Kubernetes right sizing.
And this really addresses that issue where I think for a lot of, especially FinOps teams, Kubernetes is a black box. How much you're spending on Kubernetes, but not so much all the things in it. And so I think what you're showing here, Riley, is looking inside that box and figuring out who's doing what, and trying to get clever based on what we know about what's going on inside there.
Absolutely, yeah. And we can even dive inside of a cluster, right? Like I showed perspectives for AWS before. I can go in here and show, in a cluster, right, per namespace, what's going on, right? Who's using what? Are they efficient? Are they not, right? We can see idle cost here of people are requesting resources and not using them. So let's use Harness to dive into this and let's see who needs to right size their stuff.
Okay, excellent. Another question here from Ben, who's wondering, you mentioned ServiceNow. Do you also connect with Zendesk?
I don't think we have a Zendesk integration currently, at least for the recommendation system. But we're always looking for new features. So I'll take that request because that's one that I had never thought of before.
Okay, excellent.
Seems reasonable.
Another question here. You mentioned Terraform a few times with the licensing issues around that. What do you think of Open Tofu?
Yeah, I think that it's fairly regrettable what's happened with Terraform kind of stepping back from being a really open ecosystem. So we've leaned in on Open Tofu. We support Open Tofu in parallel with Terraform. We've committed to contributing developers to that project and are helping drive that forward. So it's exciting that Open Tofu's really come forward as a very viable alternative to Terraform. It's GA now. It's production ready. So Yeah, it's unfortunate that we're in this position, but you know, I think the response from the community and the CNCF to give this code base a home, drive it forward, it's been pretty exciting. So we love open tofu is the short answer, I think.
Okay, excellent. Um, yeah, another one. Saying, I've heard you mention both engineers and FinOps. Which persona do you usually see working in the CCM module?
Yeah, yeah, it's really both. CCM, there are some features like we'll take the commitment orchestrator, right? Purchasing savings plans, definitely a FinOps tool. We have the auto stopping, right? When you say that, a FinOps person probably curls up, right? They don't want to talk about infrastructure, making changes, right? So that's more of an engineer's feature, right? But then you have the perspectives, right? The visibility, and there you have this ability to be as close to specific infrastructure resources as an application developer wants to be. And you can also go as wide as show me all my AWS costs. Let's filter them by department or region, right? And let's see where we're using capacity, right? So my job at Harness here, right, is to help customers with their cloud costs, and I have a mix, right, of both. I have FinOps teams that buy Harness, I have engineers that buy Harness, and both are successful at using the tool, right? They just use it in slightly different ways. And so, yeah, we have a giant pool of both, and we work on features for both, right? And a lot of them end up being the same, right? The same things that FinOps people want, we make it easily digestible for engineers, right? That now are thinking about costs when they're in this cloud world.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think we learned these sorts of lessons from DevOps, right? We had to think about how we would buy tools that could be consumed by developers and traditional sysadmin ops people and meet both of their needs and do both of these things really, really well. And as an industry, like that's taught us a lot. And now we're applying those learnings out to this gap between development and engineering teams and the FinOps folks so that they can collaborate together more effectively for a better business outcome. So, I think we're learning as an industry how to work across silos better and better, and we're seeing good results whenever we do that.
Okay, excellent. Another question from Ned here about cost budgets and cost alerting. And so he's wondering how could Harness Cloud Cost Management Solution proactively optimize cloud costs while providing cloud cost visibility for my organization. Any sort of best practices about the way that people use your budgeting and alerting features?
Yeah. Yeah. So there's really two camps, right, that I see. I see the organizations that come in and they have their divisions of here's what applications look like, and they have some system for budgets, right? And so we'll just pretty much port over here's an application, we give it a perspective so that developers have somewhere to go, and we attach a budget to it, right? And we have all different types of budgets you can apply, right? Different granularities, different time frames. And that's one camp. The other camp is we can get into Harness and we can create perspectives for our applications, but we don't really budget. What does that look like? And so we have a few different ways that we can do it, right? The main one that I shepherd people towards is we have a budget that just says, hey, base it off of the last period, right? So I start everybody out with, hey, let's make a monthly budget, and let's just say whatever the budget was last month, that's the budget this month. And when we set those alerts, we can set alerts for, hey, you're forecasted to go over your budget. You're forecasted to hit 75% of your budget, or you have hit 50% of your budget, right? And so even if you don't have a budget, just starting off with, did I spend what I spent last month? Did it double, right? I want to know, again, 3 days in if I'm already going to go over, right? Because then I can make a change today and stop it by the end of the month, right? And even if I don't have a budget, just knowing that you're about to go over, double your spend from last month, right, is important. And again, a lot of the times, hey, it's us scaling up. Sometimes it's not. And so Harness gives you that tool to start thinking about it. And maybe 6 months down the line, you go, hey, this has cost us, $500 a month. Let's make that our like official budget, right? And then now all of a sudden we're budgeting, and we didn't even come here to do that. We just, now that we know what our costs are, we know what to expect.
Gotcha. Excellent. Well, it looks like we're about up on time, but if somebody wants to get started with Harness or find out more, what do you guys recommend?
I mean, our developer docs are great. So I think it's .harness.io has tons of walkthroughs, right, for how to do everything. I think we're starting to publish more on YouTube now, so I think there's quite a few videos there, and I'm sure you could reach out to any of us if you're interested in the product, and we'll get you hooked up with someone who will help you take a deep dive on it.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think in the list of resources we have here, we've got a link out to one of our dev days. So if you wanted to get your hands on the software and try it for like continuous integration, continuous delivery, it's often pretty foundational. We've got an awesome workshop around that. So, depending on the kind of person you are, if you're like me and you like to start with demos, we're happy to do demos all day and things like that. If you want to get your hands on it and get started, we'll let you do that and help you along the way where you have questions.
Okay. Yeah. And I just posted in the questions area a link to the Harness Dev Days in Feb event. So you can grab that out of there for more information as well. Well, Eric and Riley, thanks for putting together a really informative presentation. Great demo. Appreciate you bringing the demo back up during the Q&A. That was awesome. And appreciate all your insights here in the Q&A. Really appreciate your time today.
Well, thank you. And thanks to everybody who joined us today. Appreciate the questions and the participation. It was awesome.
Yeah. Thanks for having us.
All right. And we have one last piece of business here today, and that is the Amazon gift card prize drawing. And the winner of the $250 Amazon gift card today is Connor Stillwagon from Missouri. So congratulations to Connor. We'll be in touch to get you your card. And with that, on behalf of the Actual Tech Media team, I want to thank Harness for making this event possible. And thanks as always for attending and for your great questions. That's going to conclude today's event. Have a fantastic rest of your day.